there and welcome to our show, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. I'm Bianca Murray and I'm joined by Carly Waters and CeCe Lira from PS Literary Agency. Hello everyone and welcome to not just another Books with Hooks segment, but our 200th Books with Hooks segment. So cheers to the team who's been showing up for 200 segments and sharing invaluable information. As per usual, we're going to dive right in. There is no time for revelry, people, or jazz hands or celebration. Okay, Carly, will you please read us the first query letter?
Sure will. Here we go. Dear Ms. Waters, I'm seeking representation for my crime thriller, Very Safe Driver, complete at just over 64,000 words, reminiscent of the themes of What Lies Between Us by John Mars, with the pacing of Intensity by Dean Koontz. When Sally Ann Dudek's husband Jacob is killed in a car crash, heartbreak mixes with mystery as the family's attorney reveals Jacob owned a property that Sally Ann never knew existed. She soon discovers is the gateway to the hidden side of a man she only thought she knew. As details of Jacob's past and his depraved appetites are exposed, Sally Ann is thrust into a life-or-death struggle against the darkest of his secrets. Can she survive and see justice done? Or will she be seduced by a desperate promise to forever spare her late husband's terrors from their children and keep the truth buried forever? For more than 25 years, I've written, directed, and executive produced documentaries and nonfiction television for clients ranging from Discovery to History to National Geographic and Netflix, among them. While developing and writing true crime programming in particular, I've conducted hundreds of interviews and built extensive relationships with both victims and law enforcement. The inspiration for Very Safe Driver borrows heavily from this experience. I want to thank you in advance for your time and consideration. Warm regards, Bill McLean.
Thank you, Carly, and I would like to thank Dean Koontz in advance for giving me a love of golden retrievers. I don't think he ever wrote a book that did not have a golden retriever in it. I grew up reading his books, and I think that's what made me get the breed when I was older. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Koontz. Okay, Carly, what was the word count there, and what was your take on that?
All right, so this one clocked in at 222, so pretty short, on the shorter side of a query we've had in quite a long time. All right, so I really like this title. This is an excellent title, Very Safe Driver. Like with the right package, I think you did superbly well here. Just a reminder that all caps for your title. I don't know how many queries we've seen lately where they've been coming in italics, and this like keeps happening and keeps happening. So I don't know if there's some sort of, I don't know, query advice out there somewhere that says do it in italics, but generally the industry standard is all caps, and I feel like I say this every episode, but it's because of formatting issues. You want it to stand out because when things are forwarded or responded to, sometimes formatting can get changed. So you want your title to be the thing that will always stand out no matter what happens with formatting, and the best way that you can ensure that is all caps. So your title, all caps, always.
Yes, but what if you E.E. Cummings and you don't want to write in all caps at all, anyway?
That is a great question. I don't really work with, how do I say this, very many eccentric personalities. I work generally with people that want to abide by the rules because they want to exist within the industry that has been created for them to succeed and thrive.
Fair enough, fair enough.
All right, let's see what Bill has come up with here. So for the comps, you definitely pick some mega bestsellers here. You know, we have our What Lies Between Us, John Mars, who's like a #1 bestselling author. We have Dean Koontz, who Bianca alluded to, has been around for a really long time and is an incredibly successful author. It's always hard when we're picking mega bestsellers. So, you know, some of the reasons for that being that you essentially have to live up to the hype of the mega bestsellers. It seems like you've picked them, it says reminiscent of the themes of, so you're kind of picking these thematically. But are there better comps that you could have picked comp-wise for the plot that could have been a little bit more accurate? Maybe not mega bestsellers, but still well-selling titles. I don't know. That's a question mark for me. This happens in every genre and every category. You know, it's the romance pitches where they're comping to Emily Henry. It's like, well, there's a whole other selection of authors that you can choose from. Obviously, she's a great author and you're going to want to comp to her, but we have to be really selective because we know that agents probably aren't going to end up using that comp. Editors in-house aren't going to end up using that comp. So just being a little bit more kind of pinpointed with your comp selection can help you in the long run. But I always, as I say, have a lot of sympathy and empathy for writers when you're choosing your comps, because you don't have access to kind of the same sales information that we might. You're probably listening to this and you're saying, Carly, how do I know if something's selling well? The things that you can do are check out the number of Goodreads reviews. So obviously you want it to be a positive review, generally in the high, 3.7 to 4.5 or higher in terms of the reviews, but you want the number of reviews. Like once we're getting into the high tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of reviews on Goodreads, that's when you're actually like knowing that that's essentially potentially the number of copies that have been sold, or library reads and obviously ARC requests and things like that. But we know that we're moving a lot of copies at that point when we have that number of reviews. Same thing applies to Amazon. So those are some kind of like backdoor ways, if you don't actually have access to sales information, for you to think, okay, what is actually selling well? And that can help you out. Another thing is the Goodreads annual reader's choice. You know how they'll do like the long list in every genre? Those are well-selling titles in the genre every year that you can kind of go to and check out. So again, there's different ways to kind of check this out other than just bestseller lists, but I would generally avoid the mega bestsellers in your category. Okay, let's move on to the actual body paragraph here. So I don't like that we have so many names in the first line. You have Sally Ann, she has two first names. Then you name her last name, and then you name her husband, Jacob. I think we can just cut the last name. I don't really think the last name is needed here. I would just cut the last name. So just Sally Ann. I think that would help out a little bit and just, again, save you a little bit of potential confusion. I really like what's kind of being buried here in the hook, which is once the husband dies, there's this whole, secret property and all of this stuff that she never knew about her husband. That's an excellent, excellent hook. What I think is actually a buried hook here and kind of is all built into this, but what I think is essentially kind of missing from the hook is what you kind of put in the last line, which was spare her late husband's terrors from their children. To me, having a female protagonist who is a mother needing to protect or hide, again, it's kind of suggested there's depraved appetites. It's not really spelled out what that is, but I think everybody's mind can kind of take them to where they think that might go. To protect the children, that's a very strong maternal drive and, internal fight that a parent would have about what they need to protect their children from. And that being at the end, to me, that should just be a little bit higher up to kind of frame the stakes of what happens if this information is revealed. What happens if the people who want this information hidden come after her, come after the children? So I would just kind of use that in the larger framing of what you're trying to do here. Because that to me was just like a major drop the bomb moment, right? Like how far should a widow go to protect her children from knowing the truth about their father's hidden property and da 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 da. Like that to me is the larger part of the hook here. We do have some rhetorical questions in here, which I suggest cut. But overall, it's a really strong bio. Obviously, this person has worked in this field for a very long time. And as I said, have kind of gone deep in terms of their expertise and relationship building. So they kind of know what they are potentially writing about in different capacities. So I think the author bio paragraph is really strong. I would just really try to focus on the body paragraph and the comps, and potentially, as I said, it's a little bit on the short side, not impossibly short, but I just might have some questions about why it might be less than 70,000 words, but I'll leave it there.
Awesome, Carly. Thank you. CeCe, handing it across to you.
The bio is definitely very impressive. And so I would focus on concrete plot points, right? Like we've talked about this before on the podcast, when you have like more vibes than plot points. Vibes are abstract, plot points are concrete. And so I kind of wanted to ask our listeners, you've listened to the query letter. I want you to now picture the scene in your head that you, as a director of a movie, would need to shoot based on the following information: life or death struggle, darkest secrets, survive, desperate promise to forever spare terrors, truth buried forever. I guess my point is you can't, because you don't know what that looks like. It's so abstract that you would need so much interpretation. You would need to add so much of your own imagination and your own assumptions. And so it makes it really, really hard. So I would revise this and focus on plot points. It's really, really important. And honestly, with your background, it'll be a breeze for you to do that, I'm sure.
Awesome, CeCe. Carly, will you please let us know what was in those opening pages?
Absolutely. So we have essentially what's happening in the query letter, which is our main character, Sally Ann. She finds out that her husband has passed in a car accident. The two detectives come to her door and kind of explain what's happened to her. She doesn't believe them. Her mind's kind of running through, it could have been somebody else. Are you sure it was him? Are you sure it was his van? She's definitely in denial. The two detectives offer to bring her to identify the body, and she goes with them. She identifies the body. It is him. And then she gets upset at the end when they take the body away. And that's where it stops.
Okay, so did you think the author started in the right place? Were those pages doing the heavy lifting?
So I think my main concern with these pages is that it is written in third person, and I think it should be written in first person, which is a very big thing to say to somebody based on 5 pages. But I think what's happening here is we are not in the widow's essentially like point of view. It is kind of a close third, so there are some kind of explanations of, she doesn't believe them, and so we do get that kind of like close third element. But if this was in first, it would be so much more dramatic and emotionally riveting. And I think we would connect much more with this protagonist because we would be in her head and going through the motions of, oh, what if this was me? Or I understand why she's questioning this, the validity of everything, and she wants to see it with her own eye. And like we would be in her seat with her through every situation. And I think what's happening here is we're not actually believing the grief and the shock, because there's moments where like there's some dialogue. I'll walk you through it. So basically, on the first page, the moment where she's finding out that her husband's dead, the detective's name is Weekly, and it says, as Weekly talks, Sally Ann stares at her, cocks her head slightly to the side. I'm sorry, have we met? Sally Ann asks. It's possible, Detective Weekly answers. We talked to a lot of people around here a few years ago when... Right, Sally Ann says. You were with that older detective. Ah, O'Hanlon, Weekly offers. And so they go into this like side conversation about a previous incident potentially in the neighborhood or something like that. And I can't believe that that's what would happen in that scenario. And so in third person, it seems incredibly detached. If it was in first person, this could work, because then we would see, oh, again, she's in denial and that's where her head's going. She's like, this isn't really happening to me. And so we would understand if she is having that completely detached conversation and dialogue, we would understand why she's having that in first person. In third person, it just makes me think that it's just unrealistic. So I think that's my main concern with the pages, would be first versus third. Again, I've made notes in the pages, so any of our Substack supporters will be able to see kind of what I'm getting at here. But I think just the emotionality would just be so much stronger if we were in her head. And I also think one of the reasons why it needs to be in first person is, like, in a kind of mystery thriller like this, where we're trying to kind of figure out what's happening next. And in third person, presumably, all of the answers could potentially be there. And so it's up to the author to give us access to what they want to give us in third person. But in first person, we would be along with her on the ride completely blind. And I think the author would be able to kind of lead us on a more emotional, visceral, page-turning journey as we, with the character Sally Ann, figure out what's happening. But in third, I think it's going to be a lot harder to dance around the facts and why you keep what from the reader and when. So that's my take on why I think this should be first person.
Thank you, Carly. CeCe, your thoughts on that? Do you agree?
I don't. Please don't throw brigadieros at me. I think that you can go deep in third or first person. Both work. It just depends on your writing style. I do agree that you have to go deep and you're not going deep, but I don't think the solution is to make it first person, unless the author is more talented at writing in the first person. But I guess what I'm saying is I personally don't want our listeners to think that if you automatically make that switch, that problem will be fixed, because there are books that are written in the third person where you go really deep into someone's psyche. And there are books written in the first person where you go really deep into someone's psyche. It really is just a matter of, knowing how to write psychological acuity, but also knowing how to write interiority really well. My note for Bill, the lovely author, and Bill, I am speaking with you with a lot of compassion, please know this, has to do with how you are framing her as a woman. This begins with, they've got it wrong. That's what goes through Sally Ann's mind in the last few moments of her straightforward, contented life. Bill, I am saying this with love. Not a woman on the planet, not one, thinks of her own life as straightforward or contented. That is simply not the experience of being a woman in this world, Bill. Don't you remember the huge monologue in Barbie about being a woman? Think of one of the most iconic archetypes of being a woman, fair in the Christian world, but still, the Virgin Mary. The woman is both a virgin and a mother. How is that possible? Because that's what women have to do. Women have to inhabit all these contradictions and walk this tightrope of a life. Even if your intention is to be like CeCe, she is actually a woman who thinks her life is contented and straightforward, but she's going to learn that it's not. Don't start with this. Let's be honest here, you are a man writing from a woman's point of view. You can absolutely do that. I would never tell someone you can't write from a certain point of view. That's not my job. I'm not going to censor people. You have to do it really, really well, because everyone has to write some things really, really well. And by starting this off by saying that this woman thinks her life is straightforward and contented, I immediately go, yeah, no, sorry, don't buy it. Especially since, and again, Bill, saying this with love, she's reading is deeply, deeply unintelligent in these pages. She is asking questions that I don't believe she would ask. I imagine that your goal is to make her seem like she's in shock, right? And so, yes, when people are in shock, they might say things that seem unintelligent. And it's not that they are unintelligent people. I totally get that. But it needs to still be believable. And I think Carly's note makes a lot of sense, because what she's saying, if I'm interpreting it correctly, is I wasn't in her head, right? And I agree. I wasn't in her head, even though technically we were. It is her point of view. But we didn't go deep. We don't have those emotionalities. Like when she says, so you really are police then? Like, was she thinking it was a practical joke? I just don't understand her interiority and her socio-emotional framework in the depth that I would need to. I'm thinking of another book in which a man writes from a woman's point of view. Really, any book by Rumaan Alam. He writes women wonderfully well, wonderfully, wonderfully well, in my view, of course. And I think that reading those books might actually help you. They are in the third person, if my memory serves me right. They're not thrillers, but they will teach you about the interiority. So I would look into that.
Thank you, CeCe. Right, CeCe, will you please read us the second query letter?
Okay, let's do this. Dear CeCe, I'm seeking representation for my book club novel, titled Redacted. Complete at 98,000 words, this book combines the high society's 60s setting of Michelle Gabel's The Beautiful People, the scheming, politically astute narrator in Rachel Kushner's Creation Lake, and the bisexual love triangle in Luca Guadagnino's Challengers. I'm submitting it to you since you're seeking novels with morally comprised anti-heroines, and I hope this story will capture your interest. Lily Olson wants to retire from criminal life. But for a young con woman in 1964, retirement usually means choosing between two types of lockup, incarceration or marriage. When she begins an affair with Andrew Pitt, an English viscount she meets in Rome, she doesn't quite see a future as his wife. However, it's not long before Andrew asks her to join him in swinging London, and Lillian can't resist the opportunity for one last job. All she has to do is manipulate Andrew's politician father into proposing a quid pro quo, one where he pays up and she returns to New York alone. In London, Lillian encounters a figure from her past, a gangster who claims that Lillian's imprisoned mentor had debts, and it's up to her to settle them. And with Andrew's father more focused on the impending election than who his son is sleeping with, she must turn her attention back to Andrew. She finds that he has secrets, and not just the ones involving his relationship with his good friend Tom. It turns out that Andrew's intentions with Lillian are more serious than she thought, the kind of serious where jewelry gets purchased and forever gets bandied about. Before the gangster grows impatient and Lillian ends up as another corpse dumped in the Thames, she must decide, blackmail Andrew or marry him. I live in City Redacted. My background is in law, but I currently work as a research analyst for a think tank that specializes in higher education strategy and policy. This novel would be my debut. Thank you for your time and consideration. Name Redacted.
Okay, CeCe, that was great. What was your word count there, and what was your take on that?
Okay, so the word count is 340 words. I have to begin by saying that the hook is incredible. Possibly the best hook we've seen on Books with Hooks. Definitely top 5. I loved it. I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is such a good hook. I'm already curious. Yes. I would be very, very anxious to scroll down, read the pages, be super excited. I do think that after you say, incarceration or marriage, you might want to add something like, but she's determined to forge a third path for herself. Because let's face it, if it is really between incarceration or marriage, then it's not really a choice because no one would be like, prison, yes. I mean, at least I don't think anyone would. When it comes to the plot paragraph, the word affair made me think he was already married, which I don't think is your intention. So I don't know. It's really not a big deal, but something to think about. It's possible. Like, I'm being nitpicky at this point. I want to be clear. Your query letter is amazing. I would totally scroll down, read the pages, be excited. It's so good. So, so good. We are an educational platform, and so I'm going to offer you notes because you're here. But please know that this is excellent. I worry the plot points don't have enough causality. So I would have preferred the gangster to then demand that she did something with Andrew or Andrew's dad. So the worlds would collide, which would then lead to finding out about Tom, right? Because she went on this investigation at the behest of the gangster. And then that would lead her to have to choose between blackmail and marriage. So the causality, if you could up the causality, that would make it even better so that it doesn't seem like satellite plot points. Again, being super, super nitpicky here. The other thing too I wanted to say is right now, the climax is framed as before the gangster grows impatient, she needs to decide whether she's going to blackmail Andrew or marry him. I felt like that was a plot point before the climax. Like, I don't think that's your climax. It is really, really important that your query letter goes all the way up to the climax. I would strongly encourage you to add whatever comes next, assuming my read is right and this isn't actually the climax. I don't think it is. If you were here, I would be totally asking you about it. We just need to have all the authors on the show. It's a huge problem because I just have too many questions. But please know this is really excellent, really, really good. I really love the hook.
Awesome, CeCe. High praise indeed. Okay, Carly, did you agree?
I also loved this. I thought the body paragraphs read like proper copy on the back of a book. So I thought this person did an excellent job. I want to be nitpicky about the first paragraph. So the comps here, we have something that's quite commercial, The Beautiful People. Then we have something quite literary, Creation Lake. And then we have a film. These are essentially for 3 different audiences. And again, I'm being very nitpicky here, but I think it's completely okay to blend things together in the sense of, it's comps for tone or audience or vibes or plot, when we can bring some things together in a way where it is this meets that, if you could imagine what the middle is, which is, I think, what this author is trying to do here. But a commercially written book is for a different audience than a literary written novel. I think that the movie was obviously a huge hit and hit a huge audience that crossed all of these types of people, which is great. But if I was the agent then going to sign this up and then go pitch this, I probably wouldn't use definitely one of these comps, if not both of these comps, just because I haven't read the whole book, so I can't speak to the literary nature of it. I think it's just really hard to use Rachel Kushner unless it's a very literary novel, but based on the plot of Creation Lake, it is a proper comp here. So I think you did right by yourself. Like, I don't think you're shooting yourself in the foot or anything like that. But would I use these comps as an agent? Probably not. But again, that's my job and this is your job, and those are 2 different jobs, and that's perfectly okay. So that's kind of what was coming to mind for me. But overall, I thought this was really, really excellent. I think one of the things that people obviously heard while CeCe was reading, but again, our Substack supporters will see when they look at it, is like just how subtle and not spelled out things were. Like, for example, when it says involving his relationship with his quote good friend end quote Tom, right? It's not like he's gay, here's his partner. It's like his good friend, right? Like, that's just so well done, and that's the kind of like copywriting that I'm talking about that I thought was really sophisticated. Another line that I think worked really well was like one where he pays up and she returns to New York alone. Right? That's not like I'm going to blackmail him and take off. You know what I mean? It's like this elevated way of like this copywriting style that was just really sophisticated and just incredibly well done. And that's why CeCe and I really like this.
Thank you. Okay, CeCe, what was in the opening pages?
Okay, so the protagonist is interviewing for a job as a secretary in Amsterdam. She tells her employer or her potential employer that she's living there with her boyfriend and doesn't have a work permit. He asks her to take a typing test. She does great. We find out there's no boyfriend. He hires her and he tells her that, she has to sort her papers soon. She's actually there to rob the safe. This is made clear from the very beginning. A few weeks go by and we learn that she's building trust within this office space.
Okay, great. So what did you think of the pages? Were they starting in the right place, doing the heavy lifting? What's your feedback?
Great writing. Great writing. You're very talented. Don't think you're starting in the right place necessarily. Maybe you are, and it's just a matter of tweaking the right way, or maybe you just want a different place. I'll tell you my big picture notes here. And please know that you are going to hear a lot of notes from me right now. The more I like something, the more notes I have. I know that feels like a contradiction, but when I don't love something, the note is basically rewrite it. But when I do love something, it's almost like being able to design a house. The house is already built. The house is fantastic. Like I can decorate the house now, but this is a metaphor because I can't actually decorate anything in my life. So, okay, here it goes. I want to talk to you about what is potentially a storyteller's worst enemy: story-splaining. Story-splaining is the introduction of an element of a story. It could be a person, a relationship, backstory, setting, anything, framed in a way that is dry and purely objective and placed in a way that feels a little artificial. Why am I bringing this up? The opening pages here, at certain moments, are a little heavy on the explanation and on the backstory. Often when I say this, writers will go, oh, I have to cut. If you're telling me there's too much explanation and backstory, the solution is to take out that red pen and cut. That's often not the case, right? You're assuming it's an issue of dosage, of dosing the right amount, but really it's usually an issue of framing. So in this case, again, in my opinion, I think you need to frame some of these lines, and I have highlighted them for you, in a way that ups the seduction, in a way that doesn't feel as dry. You don't want lines that are pure explanation, meaning a line that doesn't have a messy emotion woven into it, or a curiosity seed. Because if you do infuse these things, even though you are also explaining, it doesn't feel like explanation, right? However, if you cut the explanation, if you just take out that red pen and cut, then you're removing important context. So the trick really is to make context feel juicy and not like context at all, even though it totally is. To be clear, some story-splaining, some lines that are purely explanation is super normal. Every novel has these lines. Some of it is harmless. Some of it is normal. Every book on my bookshelf has story-splaining. It's really just don't do a lot of it, right? Especially in the beginning. And I will give you an example, and it's actually ties to my second note. So how can you up the seduction here? I had an idea, and it's just a thought, but even if it doesn't end up working for you, maybe it'll get your creative juices flowing. So we meet her when she's interviewing for this job, and she's describing the room, including where the safe is, in a way that is purely story-splaining, meaning it's just explanation, right? No curiosity seeds, no messy emotions. And then we see her covet the safe, but we see that paragraphs and paragraphs later. So this needs to be revised. The second, if she's there for the safe, the second she sees the safe, her emotions need to be like triggered, like desire or whatever emotion she feels when she feels the safe. That's really important to write visceral emotions. But here's my idea. I also think it might be really awesome if you were to play with the reader a little bit. So she's interviewing for a job and she's feeling desire for the safe, but maybe the reader could at first assume the desire is for this guy who's interviewing her, since it's just them in the room. And then quickly you could introduce the idea that it's not, the desire isn't for this man, the desire is for the money inside the safe. It would be quickly. It wouldn't be like a reveal that would take pages or pages, but you would first plant that idea in the reader's mind, that assumption, play with that, leverage that assumption, and then you would delight our brain by seeing her covet the safe, and would be like, oh, that whole desire thing, that was actually for the safe. It'll be a really small surprise, but small surprises go a long way in storytelling. So I think you should do that. And I think that would also help with the story explaining. Okay, so third note, and probably this poor author's like, I need CeCe to shut up. I worry that you're moving through time in a way that feels jarring. we start by zooming in and seeing a scene unfold very clearly. She's being hired, and that's great. But then we zoom out, and like weeks pass, and we get a bird's eye view, moving through time really quickly. And it's unclear to me whether we were zooming in again after that on a specific day, the day she goes to the bank, or if not. At first, I thought for sure we were. Then I thought for sure we weren't. Now I'm just not sure. This confusion isn't good. It's fine to zoom in and zoom out. Zooming in and zooming out is a huge part of how you write a book, right? It's normal. But you want it to be very clear. You want that effect to feel clear and unambiguous for the reader. You don't want it to be confusing. Confusion is your enemy here. And I will say this is a super, super common mistake I see in drafts, to move through time in a way that is, it's unintentional. You're just moving. You're not really thinking about it. And I encourage storytellers to be really, really intentional and mindful of when you are zooming in, when you are zooming out in time. It's a technique that should be studied, practiced, and implemented in a very, very intentional way. It makes a huge difference. It is an advanced technique. Often people can write all elements of storytelling, but they haven't mastered this one. It's super common. It is a very easy one to learn once you think about it. Once you're mindful of it, once it's in your head, and once you've looked at other books and how they do it, you're going to learn it really fast. So I want to be clear. Love the pages. Super curious. Definitely would read more. I do think you need to tweak the beginning to make it extra, extra special.
Thank you, CeCe. For our listeners, you want to listen out for our interview with Lucy Foley, who has sold over 5 million copies. She is the author of The Paris Apartment, The Hunting Party, The Midnight Feast. Something Lucy and I spoke was upending and subverting expectations in every single scene you write. And she was talking about how every scene needs to sing for its supper. And the more you can end up surprising the reader by the end of that scene, the better you've done. So I really like CeCe's idea of setting it up so that the reader thinks they know in the beginning who she's interested in, and then get surprised later by that shift. Okay, Carly, your thoughts?
I agree with everything CeCe said. It's really, really well written, very well done. I will definitely ping Bianca so I can ping the author and read more pages, because I absolutely love it. I think it's great. One of the things that's kind of coming up for me in my read here is something we haven't talked about on the show too much lately, is female likability in protagonists, or again, whether it's likability or just accessibility in terms of getting into her head, which I think is really interesting here. Because I have read books about female con artists before, pitches and novels. And I think one of the things that kind of comes up, and not necessarily female con artists as well, I think this can come up with male con artists, but when the protagonist thinks they're smarter than everybody else, and when they think they're smarter than the reader, and how that kind of shows up on the page. For example, she obviously thinks she's smarter than this person because she's trying to con them, right? That's the whole point. And obviously at some point in this novel, she's going to realize maybe she's being conned, or the world that she imagines isn't the world that she lives in. And so there'll be this kind of awakening. But in these opening pages, the kind of dance that she's doing is, and this is where I think CeCe's note about story explaining is coming in, because she has to do some explaining here, because she has to explain to us why she's in this situation and what she's trying to do. And so that's where the story explaining comes in. So that's kind of what I would suggest that you watch, is when is she coming off as potentially trying to be smarter than the reader? Because it works when she's trying to be smarter than the other character, when she says, this is what I'm playing up, no, sir, yes, sir, don't I remind you of your daughter, sir? She understands the seduction of him and trying to get this job and what she's trying to do there. But my echoes go up a little bit when a character, we spend too much time with the character also trying to be smarter than the reader. And that's where her potential unlikability could come into play. Again, I'm not saying that she is, I'm not saying this will happen, but that's something that I will be paying attention to when I read these future pages, because I hope I do. I think so far everything's great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to you both for your awesome and insightful critiques. Next week, we're back with an author interview. And then the week after that, it's Books to Hooks. If you want to submit for the segment, go to the Shit No One Tells You About Writing website, find the Books with Hooks page, and you can submit there. And we are now falling quite far behind because we've halved our Books with Hooks segment. And the fact that every few weeks we're only bringing one author on means that we are getting through fewer and fewer Books with Hooks each month. So if you submitted a few months ago and it hasn't been chosen, please feel free to submit again. Carly and CeCe, thank you so much.
A reminder that this is an unscripted program, and our conversations have been edited and condensed and is not a full picture of our feedback or conversation directly with each author. As always, refer back to our written notes for the fulsome picture. Carly Waters and CeCe Lira are agents at PS Literary Agency, but their work on this podcast is not affiliated with the agency, and the views expressed by Carly and CeCe on this podcast are solely that of them as podcast co-hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, policies, or position of PS Literary Agency. A reminder about all the ways that you can support us as a show: rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, tell your writing friends about us. We'd love to help as many writers as possible. And follow us on our Substack newsletter. Get our stacked newsletter on a weekly basis, bonus videos, articles, essays, advice, and more. You can find it at theshitaboutwriting.substack.com. That's theshitaboutwriting.substack.com.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope you'll join us for next week's show. In the meantime, keep at it. Remember, it just takes one yes.